So I want to cover three things today. I've tried to find a way to do this talk without talking a lot about myself, because frankly, I don't think it's too interesting. You could look at my LinkedIn profile, but I struggle to share the principles behind some of the choices I've made without making it concrete in my own journey. So I'll cover some of that initially. Then I will reflect just a little bit about how you actually define your own path, how you figure out what your own aspirations are. And this will be a quite thin part of this presentation, because frankly, you're the best person to figure that out yourself. But I'll try to share just two tools that might be helpful in provoking some thoughts and figuring some of this out. And then finally, and I think that's where the takeaways are, potentially, I will try to share some of the principles that I have used when I look back to determine some of the choices I've made, and some of the principles that have helped me get to where I am today. And then I think one important thing that was kind of shared by Katrine, who I wrote with on LinkedIn about this presentation a few days back. One thing is about making choices, but the situation is often that you're actually not sure what the choices you have in front of you really look like. There's a lot of uncertainty involved. What do you do when you need to pick your first education, or your first internship, or your first job? So I hope that some of the principles that I'm sharing are generalizable. Also, when you have this uncertainty, when you don't know exactly what you want. And for those of you who know exactly what you want to do, maybe this first part of the presentation will be super boring. So maybe just mute it and grab a beer and tune in again in 15 minutes. But to kick things off, born 1996 in beautiful Middelfart in Denmark, this like central part of Denmark, and went to high school there as well. Basically grew up in a place that was very safe, but also slightly boring when you started turning like 18, 19 and realizing that the world was larger than that football club you'd always been playing football in, and slightly larger than all the nature around it and your friends around it. So already in high school, I started engaging in a lot of things. And for those of you who are engaged in politics, I guess you will be either angry or happy now, but I was a proud liberal youth party member. I was active on Lars Løkke's tour bus in 2015 in the general election, and did a lot of things. And I'm not very involved in the party in any way today. I'm not even sure I would vote for them. But I think a general reflection is that I learned a lot in youth politics. I learned how to write debating articles. I learned how to organize things, mobilize volunteers. And in general, it was just a really fun experience. So obviously, if you don't know exactly who you would vote for and so forth, maybe youth politics is not the right avenue for you. But if you have that political curiosity that I had, then youth politics was a very interesting time of my life. Another thing I did a lot was attending Model UN conferences, which are basically very nerdy events for political people or political nerds who like come together. They dress up in suits, and then they pretend that they're at the UN, and they argue, say, about Israel and the Palestine conflict, or about the South China Sea, or about another conflict in the world, and then speak on behalf of a country. And the first time I attended one of these conferences, together with a guy called Nils that I will come back to later in this presentation, I represented Jordan in the Security Council and talked about a conflict in the South China Sea. So a very interesting thing to do as well. Then I graduated from high school, and I took a gap year. And if you're still in high school and you're considering whether to take a gap year or not, then my strong recommendation would be to do it. There's no rush to get started on an education. My experience has actually been that most of the people who did start straight after high school ended up dropping out, or not enjoying it so much, or taking a gap year later in their studies to go on high school, like folks high school, or something else. Obviously, there's nothing wrong with that either, but I got a lot from my gap year. And I guess I did the quite classical stuff in the first part of my gap year. I worked as a waiter at a restaurant. I spent more time with these organizations that I had engaged in. So I spent a lot of time with an organization called Danish Students Abroad. I spent some time campaigning in the election we had, or the referendum we had in 2015 about European politics. And then I started also sending applications to universities abroad, because I was lucky to run into a guy called Rune, who asked me why I was not considering universities abroad, because at that point I wasn't at all. I actually met him at this conference called the Nordic Study Abroad Community Conference. And my answer to his question was that I thought it would be easier just to get into Copenhagen Business School and study international business, because I already had the GPA for that. So I didn't really need to do anything. There were no hard applications. There was no readings, no tests or anything like that. And then I went back from that conference with Rune's question in the back of my mind. And I thought that like an easier way was just a really bad excuse for not pursuing these things. So I ended up sending off applications to these 4 universities in the UK as well. And that was basically the first part of my gap year. But what then happened kind of out of the blue was that in September, I think, at this Nordic Study Abroad Community Conference, I ran into a guy called Mats, and Mats was a speaker. I think he was the keynote of the conference. And Mats had a venture capital fund in London. And I remember speaking to him in September and was like, oh, it's cool what you're doing. And if I could be of any help, I would work for you. Like, I could move to London. I'm happy to work for free. Just tell me where and when I should be, and I'll be there. And then he said, oh, that's great, totally. And then I never heard from him. But then out of the blue, I suddenly, through a friend of his, got in touch with him again. And we started talking, and it turned into an interview. And then he flew me to London to interview. And then in the end, I actually got a role as a venture analyst intern. Very long title. Basically, to be a slide monkey and an Excel monkey at their office, which was at that point very like London focused, and basically helping across of Nova's portfolio of startups to do a bunch of things. And I think this was a very interesting experience for me, and it has been quite defining for me, because what I learned at Nova was to work in a company. So you learned all the basic skills of like Excel, PowerPoint, and so forth. You learned how to communicate with senior people who are very busy. You learn how to write emails. You learn how to manage your own time. You learn how to keep a calendar and so forth. You learn how to work like late as well. We worked a lot, probably also way too much. But when you're young and have that energy, it was actually a very interesting experience. And there's a lot of companies like Nova who offers these internship experiences. I know some of the people on this call have been there as well. It's obviously 5 years ago that I was there, so I cannot speak to how the internship is today, really. But do reach out to some of the people working at Nova if you think that could be interesting. I was lucky to get an offer from King's College. I also got an offer from UCL, but not exactly the degree I wanted to study. But I got an offer from King's College in London to study a bachelor's degree in philosophy, politics, and economics. A quite broad degree, because again, back to the racing car in the beginning and the 3 roads, I didn't really know what I wanted to do with my life at that point. And I imagine most of you in high school don't really know that either. So for me, it was about finding an education path that was interesting. On one hand, a place where I could like dive into my academic curiosity, but it was also quite important to find a place where I learned something quite broad that I could then build on in a completely different direction if I wanted to. And King's offered that with this bachelor's degree. And after having lived in London for 8 months for my internship beforehand, I kind of fell in love with London. So I decided to stay, and actually ended up spending about 5 years in London, but also some of the time in Singapore on exchange, where I studied at NUS and at Yale NUS College, where I focused mostly on development economics. And that was a really exciting part of my life, also because I didn't spend all my time working in an office alongside it, but I really spent a lot of time in libraries as well, and with friends discussing these things. Really dove into my education. And a reflection I have on those of you studying in Denmark is that some of you are probably seeing education more like a means to an end, something you just need to get rid of. Obviously have the fun, have the parties, but otherwise spend as much time as possible working. And I'm a little bit skeptical of that way of looking at education, because my own experience was that it was very defining, that it was actually really interesting when you dove into it. And I still take a lot of the things away from my time at King's that I use in my everyday life. Probably not things I learned specifically, because it's quite difficult to learn one thing at a university and then use it in the real world. But it was anyway very interesting for me to learn how to work in these new ways, and really learn how to think critically, maybe, as the most defining thing. What I also saw at King's was that there was a very specific group of students who always made it in to top universities like King's, and then there was another group of students who were less represented. And in fact, when you look in London or in the UK at top universities, a student from a private school is actually 6 times as likely to get into a top university when you compare it to a student from a public school with the exact same grades. And that was quite mind-blowing to me, really, because this means that all these 12 people are equally smart, but it's the 6 people over here and this one person that gets in, while all these 5 people are basically wasted talent. And together with Rune, that I mentioned earlier, that I had met at the Nordic Study Abroad Community Conference, and then a girl called Anna from Sweden, we started looking into why this was. Why was it that some of these super smart students from slightly less privileged backgrounds, why didn't they get into top universities? And we found that they basically faced 3 barriers. The first barrier was that they were not applying at all in the first place, largely because they didn't have any role models in their schools who had been to these top universities before. They had no one telling them that it was a good idea. In fact, they often had a lot of people who told them that it was a bad idea, that they should maybe just get a job or find a university that was easier to get into, because applying to Harvard or Oxford would anyway be just too far away from reality. So that was the first challenge. The second challenge was that if they actually applied, they rarely got offers, because the people that they competed with, these folks at the private schools, basically have full courses in school about how to apply, how to interview, how to test, how to nail the SAT or whatever. So some of these students were simply not well enough prepared for these for these admissions processes. And the final challenge was that the students who actually got offers, say from Oxford again, sometimes didn't even enroll, because they either couldn't fund it or because they thought that Oxford University would not be a place for people like them. So we thought that this was really puzzling, and we also were quite focused on the fact that there must be solutions to this, because couldn't we just take the advice, the input, the tools that the students from more privileged backgrounds got, and replicate these and give them to the students from the public schools and from the less privileged backgrounds as well. And that became an organization called Project Access. Initially, it was just a very simple program and a very very basic student organization, any other student organization you could find at your university. We started speaking to volunteers and so forth, and tried to get some more people involved. And what we tried to then do was basically 3 things to tackle these barriers I talked about before. The first one was that we wanted to build an army of role models that could inspire more students from non-traditional backgrounds to apply to top universities, and also support them on getting in. So we recruited a core of mentors. And today we have about, I think, 3,000 active mentors, but since we started, more than 5,000 people have signed up to be mentors with us. And these mentors were then current students at the world's best universities, volunteering 1 or 2 hours of their time each month to connect to a student from their own country who wanted to study their dream degree at their dream university, so that this mentor could basically be a role model, guiding them through it and motivating them, but also someone who could help them nail the application process and figure out financial aid and so forth. The second thing was to try to close this information gap, where some students had much more information than others, and some people were just left with this jungle of information that Google quickly becomes. And the final thing we then worked a lot on was developing a community at the different campuses that we operate at as well, so that we ensure that when students actually get an offer, they know that there will be a community waiting for them to start. So we built Project Access, and obviously it grew much faster than we had anticipated, but I'll get back to that, because in the meantime, I was still in school, right? So we started Project Access in the beginning of 2016. I studied from 2016 to 2019. So it was just what I did in my spare time. And alongside that, I had a lot of fun going to drinks. This is actually Rune, my co-founder, standing here, and Hasse, our former treasurer from Danish students abroad, and me probably telling a super bad joke. I read a lot of papers and read a truckload of papers as well. British universities are very reading intensive. And this was fortunately like a paper. Our exams were still written in hand. So we spent a lot of time just going to exams and reading as well. And I also spent, of course, this half a year in Singapore, where I both hung out with my three wonderful flatmates, had a lot of funky food, and spent a lot of time traveling as well, because that opportunity you have at university to take time off to explore the world was really was something I was very fond of as well. And I was also too curious not to explore some internships. So obviously I worked 8 months with Nova Founders in London in 2016. I then joined a consultancy called McKinsey in 2017, where I got on a project where I was staffed across Copenhagen, Seattle, and The Hague. So got to see the world a little bit on McKinsey's bill as well, which was a lot of fun. I worked with a blockchain company in New York called BlockTech that wanted to incubate other tech startups in the blockchain space. And I worked with wonderful Nils at Matter, which wanted to basically revolutionize pensions when I joined. They basically wanted to move pension money away from where a lot of it is still parked today. So in coal investments and oil investments and tobacco investments, and then take all this money, which is ours when we start working, and move it to stuff that makes the world a better place. Since then, Matter has done a lot of cool things, and actually they don't even do pensions anymore, but a lot of other really cool stuff that I'm sure Nils would love to share. And they also have a very cool website that I would recommend checking out. So lots of internships as well. And a general reflection here is just as well that testing things out through internships was super great for me. And it really helped me figure out, I guess, what I really wanted to do with my life, and also what I didn't want to do with my life. One thing that is important to this part of the story is that when you work at a place like McKinsey as an intern, they either tell you, thank you, that was terrible, please don't come again, or they give you a return offer, so an offer for a full-time job when you graduate. And I was fortunate to get a return offer, which meant that I actually had a job that was safe for me. I did my internship with McKinsey after my first year of uni, so that meant I actually had 2 years where I didn't need to worry at all about job applications, because I could just go back to McKinsey. And that allowed me to take more risk and spend my time in a different way than a lot of my like peer students. So be mindful of this throughout the rest of the presentation. But then I graduated, and as mentioned, I had the opportunity to go back to McKinsey, take up my return offer. I had the opportunity to stay full-time at Project Access, which had then grown into a completely different organization that was much more ambitious than when we started it 3 years earlier. Or I had a job offer from some guys at Aula, which is a London-based edtech company, where my co-founder from Project Access was suddenly the COO and had a very interesting job offer for me as well. But as you probably have guessed by now, it was Project Access that was the most interesting thing for me. We had a US expansion that was just about to start. So before I went full-time on it, we were only based on British universities, but we were about to scale to the US. We had some very core things on our programs that we wanted to spend time on. And we actually also had won enough money from grants and donors and contracts and partners like Cambridge to go full-time on it. So I decided to go full-time on Project Access when I graduated from uni in May 2019 or so. And that was awesome. Our team grew a lot. So I think today we're about 265 team members in Project Access. Francesca, that I mentioned earlier, was spearheading our operations at Brown in Providence in the US initially. And I think she might actually be on this picture from our launch day, where we were lucky to steal Deloitte's HQ in New York, so we could see Central Park on the one side and Empire State Building in the back end. So that was a really really special moment. I was also fortunate to be invited to the UN General Assembly together with the Gates Foundation, who focuses a lot on inequality and education as well, just like Project Access. So I had some really fun times there as well. We also went to China and won money from the Hempel Foundation, for our operations, working with refugees in Rwanda and from Burundi mostly. So a lot of fun on that as well. And I even, which is probably the proudest moment in my life so far, made it to local Polish TV in Gdansk, which was also very funny and very weird. So I had a lot of amazing moments working with Project Access, and would have probably continued working there a lot longer. But then this guy came, who we've talked a lot about, and I almost don't want to spend too much time on it. But as you can imagine, Project Access was a quite young organization. We had quite fragile economy, and we worked well. Basically, our organization was financed mostly from partners working to hire people from our organization. So we work with McKinsey, BCG, Deloitte, PwC, and so forth, law firms. Or we got money from universities paying for our products, basically, or paying for our programs. And universities had their mindset in a very different place because they needed to suddenly deliver fully remote teaching, which they were totally not ready to. And companies didn't need really to hire anyone at that point in time because the world economy was taking a drastically different turn. So suddenly we had an organization with not too much funding left, and we actually had 2 full-time employees and 6 part-time employees at that point in time. And with all this uncertainty, we basically had a decision between staying on, working full-time until we didn't have a penny left, and then see the organization potentially going bankrupt and being dissolved. Or we could fire ourselves and basically go back to be volunteers and then ensure that the organization had enough money to go through the pandemic and continue doing its work, which the pandemic probably made more important than ever because it's really been like spiraling some of the inequalities that we're trying to tackle. So as you can hear, we decided to fire ourselves. So me and then my COO, Raphael, decided to step back and stop working full-time on Project Access, which was a very difficult decision, but it was made a lot easier by the fact that we had a very good team that was ready to take over. And I think also when you start something and work on it at that point, I had worked on it for 4 years or so, you have a list of projects that you want to finish before you take your next step. And it actually coincided with the timing where I felt that some of the key projects for me were slowly being wrapped up. And then finally, I got the chance to chair our board of trustees, so our board basically, which means that I still have an ability to work very closely with the organization and with Ingrid, who is our CEO today. So I stepped back, and that left me with another question mark of what's next. And I can tell you that it's very difficult to be almost like the same as your organization. Like my identity was 100% overlapping with Project Access. When people asked me how I was doing, I talked to them about how Project Access was doing. And when you suddenly step down from that, you need to, well, find yourself. And it was in the midst of a pandemic, so I couldn't even go to Southeast Asia and backpack. So initially, I ran into this Rune guy again, and this time around, I was ready to work with him. So I worked with Aula for just 2 months on an interim contract to lead their operations for their learning design team. The story was basically that they had sold a contract that was way larger than what they could deliver on. So I got the chance to do some very classic firefighting together with a lot of great people that summer. I saw Emma was on the talk as well. So hey, Emma, pleasure to work with you in that summer. But it was always meant to be an interim contract, unfortunately. So when that ran out, I then finally went back to McKinsey. And for those of you who don't know McKinsey, it's basically the kind of place that I would say like 75% of people at Copenhagen Business School, maybe less, 50% of people at Copenhagen Business School who study something business related would probably be interested in working there, because it's the kind of place where you come in and you work on projects for clients for like very intensive and quite short periods of time. So say 2 months, and you just solve a business problem for them. So it's a very like dynamic job where you do a lot of different things. They focus a lot on your learning. They pay you a good salary. They allow you to travel the world while doing so. So a brilliant job, and a job where you learn to, again, communicate, you learn to solve problems, you learn to analyze, synthesize, and so forth. But it's also a job where you start really working from scratch and figuring out things. And frankly, I was not certain that that was the right place for me. And so I actually ended up leaving McKinsey again just 3 months later. And that was both because McKinsey was not the perfect place for me. It's still one of the places I would recommend to a lot of people because you learn a lot, but it was not the perfect place for me. So I ended up leaving after 3 months. And that was also to instead join a company called Home.Earth. And that's our new company. We started it on the 1st of January. I started talking to one of my co-founders, Rasmus, about it in August last year. And Rasmus is very much the driving force, the initiator behind this company. So to very quickly wrap up with what this company is about before we move on to the next part. Our urban population is growing very rapidly. So in the next 30 years, we need to make room for 2.3 billion more people in global cities. In Europe, it's about 45 million people. So you basically need to make Copenhagen 50% larger. And the way we develop cities today is just not sustainable. So some of you are probably already struggling to find an apartment. And if you find one, you probably pay more than you can really afford. This leads to more inequality. And you should also look at the fact that the way we build today is not very sustainable when it comes to the impact on the planet. Actually, like buildings account for about 39% of the energy related CO2 we emit in the world. So if we are to meet the Paris Agreement, we need to do something radically different. And same goes when it comes to like affordability and livability, the health of buildings. So we're launching Home.Earth to do something very differently, basically try to create a real estate company that is creating a completely new way forward, where we focus much more on affordability, so offering apartments that people can actually afford. We focus a lot on sustainability as well, so that we build apartments in a way that is actually in balance with our planet instead of compromising on the planet. And then finally, we focus a lot on livability, so basically how we develop cities. And we've been able to gather a very, very strong team to take on this challenge. So initially it was five of us really working on this. Rasmus was the co-founder and ex-CIO of INREP, which is the largest developer in Copenhagen and one of the largest developers in the Nordics. And again, he was the guy really taking initiative to this. And then he was kind enough to offer some of the other guys to join, including me. We then got some more people involved, including people like Casper working very closely with sustainability, Christian, who's the guitarist at Nephew and knows a lot about urban development and creativity and placemaking and so forth as well. And then finally, we got even more people involved who are working on stuff ranging from asset management to how you develop culture and organizations. And the goal for us is really to, as mentioned before, think about affordability, think about livability and inclusivity in the urban environment, and then ensure that the way we build is in balance with the planet. So I'm very happy, as you can hear, about this new role. What I work on is our business development around sustainability and technology. I work around people operations, so basically building the company and ensuring that we can grow as a company. And then I work on our branding and comms as well, so ensuring that we build a movement around Home.Earth. And I found that was just much more fun to be in this startup environment, being able to take very different roles on at the same time. And that was some of the things I didn't find at McKinsey, which is why I decided to leave. If we move to part 2 then, so this bit about defining your own path. As you can hear from my story, like if you had asked me 5 years ago, I would have never said that I would be working in real estate. I would have probably not even said that I would have worked on inequality with Project Access. So my own story has been full of these serendipitous events happening by chance where one thing led to the other. But obviously you can sit down and then reflect a bit about it. The Japanese have created this ikigai thing that is super cheesy, but anyway, I thought it made sense to just bring it into the deck, where they basically force you to think about what you love to do, what the world needs, what you can be paid for, and what you're good at. And the goal of this whole ikigai concept is to find something that works for all these things. And when I guess talk about social entrepreneurship, that's very much combining these 3 over here, which most people end up finding. Probably what you're good at and what you can be paid for is the bucket that most people end up in. Then they hopefully start adding what they love as well. And then finally, they look at what the world needs. But I think what I've found is that if you start over here, all the other things can come later. And I would very much recommend that you test things out. It took me 3 universities and I don't know how many organizations and internships to figure out that I wanted to work in impact real estate. Internships are great. Volunteering is great. Exchange programs are great. So really make sure to test things out. And I would also, again, as mentioned when I introduced Kings, I would really encourage you to dive into your education programs and find that academic curiosity. Don't think of it as a hassle that you need to complete as quickly as possible, but rather something that you can base your entire rest of your life on. And remember that you only get like one time to study in your life. You can work for 60 years after studying, but it's difficult to go back to studying. And when you then start working and you want to develop this path that you've started, I would say that there are 2 things that you should consider. The first one is whether you trust the people and the process around you. So do you enjoy your role in the company? Do you think that the prospects of you growing in the company are relevant? Do you think that that's the direction you want to go into? Do you work with smart people? People that are nice to you, people that are kind, people that teach you things and take you under their wings. And then obviously, if you work in a startup, does that company have interesting prospects as well? Or do you think it will die in a couple of years? And then you can reflect on those 4 questions and think about whether you're in the right place. But that can be quite difficult. So what I would recommend, which is much more practical, is to sit down with a piece of paper. I do it probably every 6 months or so, and ask you these 4 questions, which are very, very basic. So what do you have that you don't want right now? What is the friction in your life that you want to remove, ideally? What do you not have that you want? So these are the longings, the things that you're missing, the things that means that you have not found that wonderful ikigai yet. Then there's some things about what you have that you want to keep, which is good at making you reflect about what you're actually grateful for. And then some questions around what do you not have that you actually don't want either, so that you can cut away some of the distractions from this exercise. And then finally, you obviously always need to think about how much risk you can bear. So I could afford a lot of risk in my career because I had that job offer from McKinsey, and I have saved enough money so that if I want to quit my job tomorrow, I could probably still get food on the table for a couple of months. But you always need to think about your own personal situation and figure out how much risk you want to take on. Going to the final part of this presentation. So achieving your own path, I've tried to break it into 7 principles that has helped me really get to where I am, that I hope might be relevant to some of you. The first one we've talked a lot about already. Make sure that you try things out. Also things that might be quite far away from what you think you like, because it's really interesting to get that inspiration. So make sure to try a lot of things out, but keep it learning focused, right? Don't spend too much time just doing stuff to do it. Make sure that you at least pick up some skills or some new people or something else from these experiences. The second principle I will share is to value your time correctly and don't take money as the only form of payment. So to give you a very specific example, when I was interning with Nova initially, I probably created negative value because I was an intern taking up the rest of the team's time that they could have been spending on delivering value. So my value was very low to the company initially, and you need to think about how you can grow that value over time. And that also means that you shouldn't come into a new company and expect them to block time for you and expect them to do the things the way you want them. Rather, you should think very humbly about how you actually could contribute and create value in the place you're in. And when I then say don't take money as the only form of payment, so I actually expected to work for free at Nova the first 3 months, but I think they made a mistake and ended up paying me a little bit anyway. But my salary was very low, again, because my value contribution was also pretty low. But because my salary was low, I was able to set some other expectations and requirements to my work. So I could say with confidence that I wanted to learn stuff. And if I felt like I didn't learn, I could also go up and say, hey, you pay me a shit salary. So at least you can do is to teach me more things, spend more time on my learning. So be mindful that the most important things in your career early on is probably learnings over money. That being said, it shouldn't be slave labor either. So obviously, if you feel like you're getting a salary offer that is just crazy, then push back on that as well. I think a third thing that has helped me a lot is to bring the right mindset. I hope what comes through the other end of the screen at this late afternoon is that I'm a quite energetic person. I think quite constructively. I'm in general very happy when I'm around people. Obviously, it's not that I'm happy all the time. I have sad moments as well. But when I engage with other people, I spend a lot of time in a very constructive mood. I bring the yes hat on rather than the no hat, as we would say in Danish. Think a lot about that. Think about meetings you've had where someone was sitting in the meeting or in the classroom and was just super depressed, and think about the way you valued their contribution. If you bring the right mindset and bring energy to rooms, people will really appreciate it, and it will actually affect the people around you as well. And in that, really be mindful that first impressions matter as well, because you never know when you run into people at a later stage. But just to give you some examples of that. So I met Nils, the founder of Matter and the CEO of Matter, at Denmark in 2015 when I was still in high school. Then he came back to me a year later with a business plan to start something called Penstable back then, which then turned into Matter. And because I was at Nova Founders, he asked whether I could give him input on his pitch deck, which I was totally not qualified to do. But anyway, tried to do it so that he would remember me. And then we ended up meeting up based on this very thin relation from a conference like a few years back. And it turned out that I ended up working with him for 2 months in the summer of 2018. So that's just one example of it. And I think the example of where I am with Home.Earth now is even more crazy. I was interviewed by a guy called Martin in 2017 for my internship. Actually, it was probably it was February 2017. I've only met Martin that one time when he interviewed me. And he was the guy putting me in touch with Rasmus 4 years later, because he had seen that I had stepped down from Project Access. So again, the impression I made in that interview was enough for Martin to think, ooh, actually, maybe Emil would be relevant for this new company that Rasmus is seeking people to found it with. So think about those first impressions. And just to add to it, Rasmus is actually invested in Matter. So when I told him that I had worked there, he was probably even more excited about bringing me on. So the world is full of these weird connections. So really think about the first impressions. A fourth tip that I have learned, I think the hard way, is to have tough conversations early and directly with the people in question. If there is something, back to the 4 questions, if you're doing something that you don't want, and you actually have a chance to fix it, make sure to bring that up with the people that you're working with. If you have a task at your work right now that you just are not satisfied with, make sure to tell your boss instead of talk to all your colleagues about how much you hate your boss, because at some point the boss will probably hear the fact that you're talking behind her back or his back, and then it will never play out well for you. The sooner you find the courage to have the tough conversation with your boss or with your colleague, the better, really, I would say. And building on this, the sooner you learn to ask for and get feedback, the further you'll get. People are terrible at receiving feedback. They think that feedback is something negative, that it will make you angry. But in reality, feedback is the biggest gift you can get. And in the beginning, you will probably be angry when you receive feedback, and you might even interrupt people and start reacting to it. Then step 2 is to just feeling angry, but listening through it and trying to not comment too much. And then when you actually start understanding the value of feedback and how it makes you better all the time, you will probably not even be angry anymore when people give you feedback, but you'll start saying thank you and actually appreciating it. Almost wrapping up. So the 6th principle that I think is super important is to seek interesting perspectives and start building your network early. So I think you can break people down into 3 groups. You have peers. So everyone on this call, for example, are peers, right? People that are probably on your age and that you could speak to about just some of the same challenges that you have in your own life. Then you have role models, people that are a couple of years older than you that you think are doing something cool. And then you have idols like Elon Musk or Andreas Mogensen or whoever, Beyonce, I don't know. People that you think are just super cool that you want to base some of the principles of your life on. So think about that. use LinkedIn or use some other tool to build that network. Brace for rejection. And remember that people love talking about themselves. I said that I wanted to talk less, and I'm already at 50 minutes. I'm terrible at keeping time, right? People love talking about themselves. Also, when you reach out to them and ask for a cup of coffee or a 15-minute call to ask them some questions. So remember that, but try to stay authentic. Try to not just send the same message to everyone. If you just connected with me on LinkedIn afterwards without writing something, I would be hesitant to accept you. Whereas if you said, hey, I listened into your talk and XYZ was a reasonably not too terribly bad thing to say, then I will probably be much more inclined to connect with you, because I feel like you actually have a reason for connecting with me. And same goes for very senior people. If you read something they wrote in the newspaper or said on TV or something like that, they will probably be excited about the fact that you actually observed something and commented on it and then reached out. And when seeking people, and this is just a quick video we have in our welcome briefing in Project Access talking about why we're very selective in a team. Remember that talent matters. So this is just a little football game. I think it's from South Korea, where you have 4 people, 4 grown-ups in this case, playing football against, I think, 100 kids. And what you'll probably guess by now is that 4 talents, 4 grown-ups in this case, are actually much better than 100 kids. So when you look around your colleagues today, think about whether you're playing on the big team with a lot of people around that might not be super talented. If you ever feel like the smartest person in the room, be very careful, because that's not the ideal place to be when you're young. And I think the final point I want to mention is to seeking diverse perspectives. So in Denmark, we are also very good at finding people who are similar to ourselves and then enjoying our time with them. But I think both diversity has a lot of power, that we actually hang out with people and work with people who do something very differently from us. Diversity, not just gender and race, but also what people study, what they work with, what kind of background they come with. And diversity will help you learn empathy, which is probably one of the most important skills in the world. Empathy is basically about the ability for you to be able to put yourselves in the shoes of the person sitting across the table in a meeting room. So for example, if you learn what the interview and a job application process will want to hear from you, if you have enough empathy to understand that, you will be much more likely to get that job. Or you could continue, if you understand your users and building an app, you will be able to be very successful. So seeking diverse perspectives, I think, is super key as well. Some concluding thoughts. Remember to have fun along the way. I've traveled a lot. I've not just been sitting in a basement and working. So remember to have fun. That's the most important part. If you have fun, you'll probably also be a lot better at what you're doing. Learn to embrace failure and rejection and receive feedback and all these things. Like, the sooner you learn not to be angry about this, but taking it as learnings, the better. Remember in this relation as well that Denmark is one of the easiest countries in the world to follow passion. I know we have a couple of international people on the call as well. But in Denmark, you can literally go out, lose your job, and still earn a wage that is higher than probably, like, I don't know, 50% of the world is earning from Kontanthjælp or dagpenge or whatever else you can get on. So you get paid to study as well. So we don't have a lot of student debt when we're done with school. So really use up that privilege it is to be from Denmark and be able to follow your passion with very little risk, because we have that safety net. Aim high. Don't take no for an answer in the beginning, and don't worry too much about what your friends are saying or what your parents are saying. If you think that you have the talent and the passion and the potential to pursue something, then do it, regardless of what people tell you. Then you might fail, but at least the journey will probably be quite fun. Anyway, and then the last point that I will make is that I think you should use your talent responsibly as well. You don't have to start an organization like Project Access to use your talent responsibly. But if you are actually talented, then I think it's important that you recognize that you come from often one of the most privileged countries in the world, and that some other people on this planet have, for example, been very heavily affected by Corona, and that you use that talent either to make some people rich or to tackle some of the challenges that we face as a society globally. And from my own experience, it's also opened a lot of doors, from being invited to things to a lot of other things. So this whole idea is actually not just charity either. It's actually very interesting what you can get out from using talent responsibly. So that was a very long presentation. But if there's any questions, I will stop sharing. And thank you very much for your time.
Yeah, it was great. And I'm sure a lot of people out there are or have a lot of questions that you want to ask Emil. And the way you do this is use the raise your hand function here in Google Meet. And I can see we have a ton coming in already. And I think we'll start with Anton Muratov. Please unmute your microphone and just have a chat with Emil and ask your question.
Hi there. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, great. Thanks so much for everyone who set this up, and Emil as well, for your presentation. It was interesting to hear sort of your reflections about your story and, you know, how you got where you are and what you're working on now. I sort of listening to your own story, I, funny enough, heard a lot of my own in there, what I'm going through, and I think I'm in quite a similar position. I'll be finishing university at UCL next month. I was on a path to have a very sort of corporate job and stability and all that. But instead now I'm leading a startup focused on energy efficiency in commercial buildings. And you know, it's very busy, and the learning curve has been very steep for me, especially. So I'm sort of just wondering, how do you balance and how do you prioritize learning versus actually doing, you know, the work? Because on one hand, you know, you definitely learn on the job, but you also don't want to find yourself years later not knowing the fundamentals.
Great question. Sounds very interesting what you're doing, and happy to hear that you're pursuing it. I have never learned so much. So when I just focused on executing at Project Access, and probably also what I did at Matter, what I do here at Home.Earth is very execution focused. So I'm a strong believer in learning by doing through the job. I don't think a corporate job can build you a stronger toolbox. And what I also find when I'm working with my colleagues here, where at least 4 of them have spent a lot of time at McKinsey before, is that they are brilliant problem solvers and very conceptual problems. But the basics, like getting a website flying in a couple of weeks, or getting a logo created without having to pay a designer a ton of money, that's stuff that is just completely normal for startup people to just go out and fix, because we've learned to fix things. So I would, I think the dichotomy splitting learning and executing is well, sometimes it's true, and obviously it depends on what kind of execution work you need to do. But I think it's quite overlapping. And I would probably suggest like not to worry too much about not learning. But I would also encourage you, like we actually started, Raphael and I, when we worked full-time, we were the only 2 people working full-time in Project Access. We actually blocked time to both give each other feedback, but also to learn stuff. So we started reading papers that we'd always thought we would be reading, but we never had time for. So we blocked 2 hours each Friday morning for some of these things, where we also had a nice coffee and a walk and stuff like that. So maybe do that, or find people that you can share learnings with on that journey, because you probably learn much more than you realize. You just need someone else to point it out or help you reflect about it. It's a very diplomatic answer, I reckon, but might work for you.
Thanks so much. Thank you.
Great question, Anton. We have another question from Nils Feedback. Please unmute your microphone and ask your question.
Hey Emil, thank you for the presentation. Good to hear from you. I have a really simple question, and that is, where do you get your energy from? We've worked together for months. I have never ever seen you. Everyone sort of, we have energy batteries. Mine run out. I've never seen someone whose energy batteries doesn't run out. Where do you get it from? Where do you get your drive from?
It's a good question. Mostly people, probably, and doing something interesting. But I also, I've realized I get a lot of energy from proving people wrong. So probably what I got a lot of energy from in Project Access was that my dad continuously said that it was not a real job. He still calls it my plane ticket job, because the only currency I was paid in was plane tickets to fly the world, travel the world. And then going out and actually, I don't know, signing a partnership with Cambridge for £40,000, or signing winning a grant from WeWork for £500,000 kroner or whatever, and then proving that it actually materializes. I think that's exciting, and that drives me. And I think that's also why I ended up in the, like, at face value, super boring sector. Like real estate is super boring. It's full of old, white, boring men who do things ideally as they've done it for the past many years. And the idea that you can challenge this and change it fundamentally, I think it's just exciting. So I think that, and then very practically, like any other person, like I sleep. If you haven't read Why We Sleep, then do it. It's mind blowing. Like if you don't sleep, you die earlier, and you don't have energy, and like there's a lot of bad things if you don't sleep. If you don't do sports, like similar, I try to do as much sports as possible. We have our office like in the middle of nowhere outside Copenhagen, so I cycle like half an hour each way, and that's helpful as well. So a mix, like being on a mission that is very interesting and meaningful, being surrounded by smart people, and then ensuring to have a balanced life alongside it. That's probably the not so secret but very obvious source. And then I guess my parents put in a good Duracell battery in my head.
Great question. We have another question come in from, I'm sorry if I mispronounced your name, Shuhui.
Hello, Matthias. Yeah,
Hi.
you can also call me Sophie. Hi, thank you so much for arranging it. And also thank you, Jacob, for inviting me yesterday. And of course, thank you so much, Emil. I just thought about, because you mentioned that we should read the book Why We Sleep, but I was just wondering, like, if you have like other book recommendations, or who your role model is, because like I think that says quite a lot about a person.
Thanks for that question. I love it. I'm a big nerd when it comes to literature, so I read a lot of old stuff. I read Grapes of Wrath right now. I read The Great Gatsby earlier. So I think I read two kinds of things, like very like interesting just literature, and then I've also started recently actually reading some of these. I was about to call them self-help books, or like books that help you get better at working. I think the books that that have shaped the way I think about work and culture building and organization building, which is what I'm very excited about. I think No Rules by Netflix founder Reid Hoffman, who wrote it together with a INSEAD professor, is brilliant. I actually just bought it to McKinsey's HR boss because I thought she would appreciate it as well. It's a book basically talking about how you should give your employees more ownership instead of controlling them all the time, and how you get amazing results from that. And then I read Bob Iger's book recently as well. So he was the CEO of Disney for 15 years or so, and he's just been very, very successful in that. It's a very entertaining book, but he's also a brilliant guy. And I see someone writing legend. He is definitely a legend, Bob Iger. So like it's called Ride of a Lifetime. That was brilliant as well. I've read some of those like Atomic Habits and stuff like that. And honestly, they never really made me like think too much. It was a great executive summary reading the first couple of pages, but aside from that, it was not super interesting. So I think like No Rules and like Ride of a Lifetime, really good books. Those I would definitely recommend.
Thank you. I have noted it down.
And I can see we have another question coming in from Nils again.
Let me pass it on to Albin to give him a chance as well, then I can take the next one.
Hi. Well, thank you so much for arranging this. Like a lot of people have said, not to turn this into a literature or like a book club.
Would love to.
Right. Have you read Utopia for Realists by Rutger Bregman?
No.
Fantastic. I think he's from the Netherlands, economist who's writing about UBI, Universal Basic Income. I thought about him a lot when you were talking about real estate, and he mentions sort of some programs they've had in Amsterdam with relocating people without homes. And the effect it has on their lives is just mind-blowing. You see the psychological effects a home has on people.
Yeah, I don't know if you we think a lot about homelessness in Home.Earth as well, and that's one of the main motivations for building this in the first place. Not just your classic homeless person who's like, I don't know, sitting where it's apparent. It's also people who are couch surfing at their friends' places for several months, which is super uncomfortable for a lot of people as well. And housing is obviously like super important to homeless people. And what has gone wrong in the past about fixing homelessness is you often focus on all the things around it. You try to get people a job, you try to get people a social community that might be less alcoholic or so forth. Then some people in Norway try to just start giving people a home. And actually the job came afterwards, quite fun, like automatically the community came automatically as well. People started restoring, they like left drugs and alcohol. So in homelessness, what's really hot right now is a housing first principle. And I know the UBI movement is very excited about that as well, because it talks into this idea of giving like an asset to people quite without no strings attached, and then seeing them use that asset in a responsible way. And it seems to be working. So it's quite exciting, and it's being pioneered in Aarhus in Denmark soon as well, with a couple of different initiatives funded by an impact fund actually. So lots of interesting stuff in that project. No, but I'll definitely read the book. It sounds interesting. Thanks.
Thanks for the question. Does anybody else have any questions? Otherwise, I know that Arthur had his hand raised earlier, and he might want to.
Nils as well.
Nils as well.
Before.
Yeah, Emil, I have one more question for you, and that goes. Basically, you said it yourself, be ambitious and aim high for your career. You're 25 now. This is how far you've become. Just to make you sort of give a formal one, so that we can hold you accountable for it. What is the moonshot project for your career? What is the big, ambitious, audacious, big hairy goal for your career?
I don't know. And that's, I think, what's been exciting so far. I've worked on education access, I've worked on sustainable pensions, I've worked on now sustainable and affordable and regenerative real estate. I've done vaccine supply chain while at McKinsey. So I've worked on a lot of things that I found meaningful. So I'm not able to answer that question. I've tried for a long time. I know that I want to. So I'm very much a participant in the founding team in Home.Earth. It's driven by people who are like experts in what they do. I'm like 20 to 30 years younger than the rest. So while I'm called a co-founder, I'm also just an employee, to be very, very frank. I do drive a lot of stuff that I find exciting, but we're a big founding team. So my role in this team is not necessarily to set the vision and drive it. My role in the team is more to get that vision materialized into reality. So I know, to your question, Nils, that in the next 10 years,
let's try. So think of it like the way I think about it this way, right? You've built the best possible foundation. You've basically spent the last, since you were 16 and got into youth politics, you've built the best possible foundation for a future career. And the question is, if you could choose, set one big, hairy, audacious goal. Now, what is it? You're not giving away.
Yeah, I love the question. I don't think I reflect enough to answer it. I think there are some challenges in society that I would love to tackle. I think one is polarization, how our society is almost segregating, how schools, for example, in Denmark are getting less and less diverse. So you have like rich people's kids going to one kind of school and less well-off people's kids going to another kind of school. And that just completely shatters the foundation of the society we're building in Denmark. And Denmark is pretty like good on these kind of things compared to a lot of other countries. Like go to South Africa and you will see this completely ingrained in the way the country has been set up because of apartheid and colonialism and so forth. So I think that challenge is definitely one I'm very passionate about. But I think also like maintaining this very holistic view that we have in Home.Earth, where we don't just want to fix a small thing, but try to find, say, an asset class like real estate is the biggest asset class in the world. 217 trillion of like money is parked in real estate. It's huge. We spend 90% of the time in buildings. Like if you improve that just a little bit, or if you actually systematically change the way we develop buildings by creating a new economic paradigm, like that's exciting stuff as well. So being able to do systems change, and I would say this similarly to what you've done at Matter. Like when you started Matter some years ago, pension funds tried to avoid answering the tough questions about how much of their capital was in green stuff. Now you don't do pensions anymore because most of them realized that that's what their customers want, because Matter as one important actor was able to put this in the spotlight and call people out. And founding something like that changes a sector, that's probably the hairy goal for me. Changing a sector, maybe real estate, maybe something even more old-fashioned and broken, like education or something.
Thank you, Emil.
It's good questions, tough questions.
And I think we have another question coming in from Albin.
Thank you so much. I was wondering, I feel like your story is very interesting, Emil. Can we talk real estate a little bit?
Sure. Though I'm not the real estate guy on the team, so I know what I've learned in 3 months, but not more than that. I built the organization part of the team. Yeah.
I see. Just kind of spitballing. So I grew up in Stockholm. I'm Swedish. My family is, slightly in real estate. My mother works as an architect, so I've been quite interested in it my entire life. I've always felt like the biggest issue, at least in Sweden, has been an incentive problem. There's simply, no profits in building anything but housing for families with 2.5 kids and 2 bathrooms and really bad materials and poorly made. So questions. First of all, would you agree with this, or do you feel like you have another perception? And if so, how do we tackle this? What do we do?
So the question is basically like, is it fair that like a family like yours cannot afford like a standard of housing that is comparable to market? Or
no, sorry, more, how would you say, how can we incentivize builders, real estate agents,
okay,
the industry in general to go in this direction that we want them to go?
Yeah, okay. I think that's a really good question. I think for us, I think the way we look at it is first we actually map some of these demographic trends. So one big demographic trend is that more and more people are singles. But the way we build today, we build very large units on average. So there's a mismatch between what the data actually shows and what we build today. And that's obviously, again, that's an incentive problem. That's because people are not incentivized to build smaller units, often because municipalities are requiring units to be quite large, because if you have large units, you have families moving in, and cities, like municipalities, love families, whereas they don't like small units, because then you get poor people, and poor people, they don't pay as much down in the super bowls, and so your tax rates and so forth are lower. So you want the big families. So I think incentivizing, I think there are many elements to it. It's a really hard question actually, but it's very interesting. I think one part is the municipal actor being a market maker to ensure that incentives align for the builders. Another part of this is the investors. Investors are working exclusively to maximize returns now. It's starting to grow that like housing needs to be more sustainable. Like you're starting to like certify buildings, whether they're gold, silver, or bronze certified for sustainability. And the sooner we get like builders to also recognize the social dimension and start certifying, so it becomes a requirement, the better. Because before that happens, before we start calling them out on it, then you will continue having profit maximizing investors, which is fair. That's how the world works. Like if you have a company, you want to maximize your profits, but we need actors that can go out and challenge that assumption. Like we started out thinking, should we be a non-profit actually or for profit? And it's like, it would be very difficult for us to be in a non-profit paradigm because we need a lot of money. Like the first project we have will cost about 400 million kroner. 12,000 square meters. Like it's hugely capital intensive. That just doesn't work in a nonprofit paradigm. But we don't think it's necessary to create 20% returns. Maybe we can like do half that and then use the remaining 10% to invest in affordable rents or in sustainability and so forth. So it's also about investors both being willing to do this, and it's about companies like Home.Earth, impact real estate funds, offering like attractive risk-adjusted returns, but returns that are not market level, but like more like, I don't know, so socially and sustainably, like where the externalities are also priced in, where the externalities from the footprint the building has on the planet is also priced into the return that you get. I think those are probably some thoughts. But yeah, it's a really hard question. I would say so. Would love to hear a perspective on it on an email afterwards if you have some thoughts.
Yeah, thanks for the question.
Thanks so much.
And we have just time for one quick question before we're tuning out. I know we've gone a little bit over time. We have Casper here wanting to ask the last question. Please unmute yourself, Casper.
Yeah, hi. So just to give some quick context, I am 20 years old, graduated high school this summer, and currently have my gap year working at a Danish startup. So Emil, it has been really great hearing your insights about your career so far. And my question is, how has it been being like the young guy dealing with those universities and companies trying to raise funding, and now joining a company with some really like experienced guys? I was wondering, like, despite your age, how you have managed to be taken seriously and do some really impressive things, and if you face some difficulties due to your age.
Good question. Thanks for that, Casper. Yes, like some people call it ageism, that you discriminate people based on age, and that's totally like a thing. And sometimes it's warranted. Like I could not go up to Rasmus, and for example, like had Rasmus been here and answered Albin's question, you would have gotten like boom, 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 boom. This is how we do it. So in this perspective, like Rasmus knows more than I do. So when we sit and have a meeting together with an external partner, there's certain things that I answer, and there's certain things where I just shut up. Even now, I think the important thing is to like I've been quite ruthless at finding companies where like they actually listened and where they gave me ownership and trusted me and hired me because they thought I could contribute. And frankly, one of the things I didn't find at McKinsey was some of these things. At McKinsey, they were very hierarchical, despite like talking about not being very hierarchical. So I didn't enjoy it there exactly because my job title and my age were taken into account before the stuff I said. And I would rather have it the other way around, that people should judge me on what I say and the output of my work. And then they should obviously also look at my age and my seniority and gauge, does he actually know what he's talking about, or is he just shooting? So I think to your question, maybe flipping it more practically, I think like young people should listen a lot and don't pretend that they know stuff. I spent a lot of time talking about stuff I didn't know anything about because I thought it sounded smart early on. And I learned, I think, to be a little bit better listening now. I'm not perfect yet. But anyway, listening, it is a good first start. Finding people who actually listen to you as well and trust you and give you time to speak and challenge you as well and give you feedback on when what you say is stupid is also important. And importantly, back to the point of feedback, listening to when people give you feedback so that the next time you say something, it might be 10% smarter. I think that's good as well. But it's also small things, like if you're dressed in like a hoodie as a young guy on the table, everyone will be like, oh, okay, it's just a kid. Whereas if you dress like 5% more serious for a meeting than everyone else, people will probably respect you a bit more. Don't wear a tie, then people will think, oh, he dressed up exactly because we want to take him seriously, and then they will not take you seriously. But it's small things like those that might matter a little bit in certain contexts as well. Yeah. I remember the final reflection. When I was at McKinsey, I did speak a lot, not necessarily without like saying smart things all the time, because I was very close to the analysis. So when our clients asked about a piece of the analysis, I often knew the answer. And at one point, my partner, a guy I really enjoyed working with, a guy called Lassen, he like pulled me out after the meeting and said, next time we have a meeting, try not to say anything during the entire meeting. It will be impossible for you, but I encourage you to do it. I'll buy you a beer if you're able to do it. And I tried to do it. It was really difficult. I think I did it. And then he said, did you see this guy at the end of the table not saying anything in the meeting until the very last end? He summarized all the 3 key points, nothing else, not more, not less. He just took away the important things from the discussion. And that was just like a super good point and a piece of feedback I've tried to remember since then, that it's not the guy who says the most in a meeting that is the smartest person. Often it's actually the guy or the girl who manages to listen across and figure out what's important, where the conflict lies, and then summarizes and talk through. And that's something that really shows maturity, and something we could probably all be better at, instead of just repeating points that have already been made earlier and so forth.
All right,
Yeah.
thank you.
Yeah, thanks for the great question. We're gonna have to wrap up for this time. I'm so sorry, but it's been a real pleasure having you, Emil, and especially to everyone who tuned in. It's been a pleasure meeting you and hearing great questions from all of you. And I hope to see you on our next free masterclass as well, which will be next month. If you want to be the first to know about it, either go follow us on LinkedIn or go on our webpage and sign up for our newsletter, and you'll be the first to know. If you need more people like yourself and want to start engaging in a network of really talented people here in Denmark and in Copenhagen and Aarhus. We have these circles of 25 people in a focus group. We currently have an entrepreneurship circle. We also have a sports circle for the sports interested, and we have an investing circle. And you can apply for membership in one of those on our webpage as well. It's Beecon connectionelite.com, and there's a button up there called apply to become a member. Again, it's been a pleasure, and I hope to see you all again next time. For now, thank you, Emil, and thank you to the rest of you. Have a good day.
Thanks for tuning in, everyone. Enjoy the evening.